Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision.
Right. Yeah, like it should be exact.
Exactly. It feels almost like engineering. I mean, if you break your arm, you go to the hospital, they put you in a machine, and the X-ray shows that jagged white line on the black background.
And the doctor just points and says, there it is. That's the problem.
Yeah. It's binary, broken or not broken.
It's clean. And, well, more importantly, it's comforting. I think we just naturally gravitate toward things that are visible, things that can be categorized and neatly put into a box.
But then you step out of the physical realm. You step into the world of neurodevelopment, of trauma, of deep psychological fractures.
Oh, and suddenly that X-ray machine is completely useless.
Totally useless. We end up looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just incredibly murky. You can't just point to a glowing white line on a piece of film and say, there's the moral decay.
Right. Or look, right there, that's where the empathy snapped.
Yeah, you just can't do it.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Because when we transition from physical medicine to the ailments of the human soul...
The quiet, invisible fractures of the mind.
Exactly. That murkiness becomes a total abyss. The symptoms aren't, coughs or fevers. They are obsessions, rationalizations, and this slow detachment from reality.
Which perfectly frames our mission for you today. Welcome to a special, custom-tailored deep dive into one of those intense, claustrophobic, and brilliant psychological portraits ever put to paper.
We are exploring the anatomy of a crime.
But we aren't stopping there. We're diving headfirst into the devastating, soul-crushing aftermath of that crime. We've got a massive stack of excerpts from Fyodor Dostoevsky's classic masterpiece, Crime and Punishment.
Specifically, we're looking through the lens of the Constance Garnett translation provided by Project Gutenberg.
Right. And our goal today is to unpack the harrowing journey of Rodion Raskolnikov. We're going to peel back the layers of his twisted justifications.
Walk the suffocating, sweltering streets of 19th century St. Petersburg.
Yeah, and witness the horrifying, explosive collision between abstract philosophical theory and, well, brutal, bloody reality.
The stakes for you as a listener are incredibly high here. You are about to witness exactly what happens when a brilliant but profoundly broken mind decides it has the right to play God with human life.
It's chilling. You're going to see the mental gymnastics required to justify the unjustifiable.
And crucially, we're going to explore how the true punishment for this ultimate transgression, it doesn't wait for a courtroom or a jury or a judge.
Right. The punishment begins the very millisecond the crime is committed, locking the perpetrator inside a prison built entirely of their own paranoia and guilt.
So, okay, let's unpack this from the very foundation, because before we even meet Raskolnikov, before we step foot into his tiny, suffocating room, we have to talk about the architect of all this anguish.
Fyodor Dostoevsky himself.
Exactly. Our source material includes the translator's preface, and, reading about Dostoevsky's own life is honestly like reading a prequel to the novel's Misery.
Oh, 100%. He was the son of a doctor, raised in deep, grinding poverty by hardworking, deeply religious parents.
And they lived with 5 children in just 2 rooms.
2 rooms. So right away, before he even puts pen to paper, the theme of physical confinement, of living on top of one another with no space to breathe.
It's just baked into his DNA.
Yeah. But what's really fascinating here is how his life trajectory mirrors the brutal unpredictability he later forces upon his characters.
Right, because he goes from early, promising literary success with a work called Poor Folk straight into an unimaginable state-sponsored nightmare.
In 1849, Dostoevsky was arrested.
And the critical context here is that he wasn't even a hardcore revolutionary by temperament or action. He was simply part of a group of young intellectuals who met to read banned texts.
Thinkers like Fourier and Proudhon, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to discuss the oppressive censorship of the regime. But under the iron-fisted reign of Tsar Nicholas I, just engaging in intellectual debate was entirely enough to warrant a death sentence.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this specific event because it completely defies belief. He was condemned to death, spent 8 grueling months in a fortress prison.
8 months?
And then he and 21 other men were taken out to Semyonovsky Square to be shot by a firing squad.
The translator's preface includes a letter Dostoevsky wrote to his brother describing this entire ordeal, and it is agonizing detail.
They read the death sentence aloud in the freezing cold. They forced these men to strip and put on the white shirts worn by the condemned.
Literally dressing them for their own funerals?
Yeah. And they bound them in groups of 3 to the execution stakes. Dostoevsky was in the second row. He actually calculated the math of his own existence and realized he had only minutes left to live.
He kissed the men next to him goodbye. He made peace with his maker.
And then, at the very last possible microsecond, a drum roll sounded across the square. They were unbound and casually told that His Majesty the Tsar had graciously spared their lives.
The sentence was merely commuted to hard labor.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this wasn't just a last-minute administrative pardon.
Oh, no, not at all. It was a mock execution. It was a calculated, deliberate, psychological torture device orchestrated by the state to completely break the spirits of these prisoners before sending them into the abyss of Siberia.
Wow.
The state wanted them to experience the absolute finality of death so that their subsequent imprisonment would feel like a twisted form of mercy.
And its effect on the human mind was immediate and catastrophic, right?
Yes. One of the prisoners standing right next to him, a man named Grigoriev, went completely mad the moment he was untied from the stake.
Just snapped.
His mind simply shattered under the weight of that cognitive dissonance, and he never regained his sanity.
So how does a brain ever recover from that? Like, you were told you were going to die, you physically feel the cold air, you see the rifles pointed at your chest.
You accept the end of your consciousness.
Yes, and then someone just yells cut like it's a movie set, and you were sent to a frozen wasteland instead. That doesn't just give you a new lease on life.
It permanently destroys your understanding of consequences, of morality, of time itself.
You would view every single minute of life through an entirely different, probably terrifying lens.
It strips away all theoretical distance from suffering. I mean, most philosophers or writers debate mortality and morality from the comfort of a warm study.
Right, but Dostoevsky doesn't just write about the anguish of a condemned man counting his final seconds.
He lived it in his own flesh, his own racing heartbeat. And the physical toll of this trauma was just as severe as the psychological one. He developed violent, severe epilepsy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these seizures would happen 3 or 4 times a year, plunging him into darkness and leaving his brain bruised and exhausted. And they occurred more frequently during times of extreme stress.
Which he had plenty of. Because later in life, after finally returning to Russia from his years in a Siberian penal colony, surrounded by hardened murderers,
He was weighed down by crushing debt.
yeah, he was forced to take on his deceased brother's massive financial liabilities, and he had to write at a hair-breaking, frantic speed just to keep his creditors at bay.
He literally couldn't afford the luxury of correcting his drafts. He was writing for his life.
So when we are reading the pages of Crime and Punishment, and we see the feverish, hyper-realistic, manic states of his characters,
When Raskolnikov is hallucinating or shivering in a delirium or feeling his mind detached from his body.
this isn't just an author employing clever literary devices. This is Dostoevsky transcribing his own neurological and psychological trauma directly onto the page.
Exactly. He perfectly constructed the ultimate pressure cooker for his protagonist because he had spent his entire adult life trapped inside one.
The psychological trauma he endured acts as the absolute blueprint for the novel. He understands intimately how isolation, fear, and physiological stress can warp human reasoning.
And recognizing that historical reality fundamentally changes how we view the opening of the story. The transition from the author's real-life confinement to Raskolnikov's suffocating physical reality is just seamless.
We move from the historical pressure cooker straight into the literary one. And the way he paints that literary pressure cooker is so visceral, you can almost choke on the air.
Oh, definitely. We open in Part 1, Chapter 1, on an exceptionally hot evening in early July.
Raskolnikov leaves his lodging, and the text describes his room as a garret under the roof of a 5-storied house, but it explicitly says it was more like a cupboard than a room.
A cupboard. And he has to slink down the stairs like a cat just to avoid his landlady, because he is hopelessly in debt to her.
And just the mere thought of her nagging or her demands for payment sends him into a panic.
The physical environment Dostoevsky establishes here is not just a passive backdrop. It acts as an active, malevolent participant in Raskolnikov's mental decay.
St. Petersburg in July is portrayed as an oppressive, inescapable oven.
The text repeatedly emphasizes the airlessness, the choking dust blowing off the scaffolding and the bricks of the expanding city, and that special Petersburg stench.
Yeah, you have the insufferable smell pouring out of the pothouses, the cheap taverns that crowd the poorer districts.
And the drunken men stumbling through the streets, screaming and fighting, even in the middle of a working day.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Think about the modern concept of a sensory deprivation tank.
Okay.
If you put a person in one of those tanks, but instead of dark, quiet water, you crank the heat up to 100 degrees, You pump in the smell of stale beer, rotting cabbage, and drops of paint,
Sounds awful.
and you completely isolate them from any healthy, grounding human contact. The mind is going to start eating itself. It has no other option.
That's a great point. Raskolnikov is entirely severed from society. He talks to himself in the street. He hasn't eaten a proper meal in days.
He is wearing clothes so degraded, so ragged, that the text points out even a man accustomed to shabbiness would be deeply ashamed to walk out in daylight wearing them.
This profound isolation creates an echo chamber in his mind. Without social friction, without friends or colleagues that challenge his ideas or ground him in mundane reality.
His thoughts just spiral into extreme abstraction.
Yet, amidst this abject, crushing poverty, we are immediately presented with the first glaring glimpse of his internal contradiction.
Oh, yes. The hat.
Despite his rags, he is wearing a ridiculous, battered, tall, round hat from Zimmerman's.
It's rusted with age, it's brimless, it's bent, and it stands out like a beacon.
And when a drunken man drives past in a wagon and points at him shouting, "Hey there, German hatter," Raskolnikov isn't struck by shame over his poverty.
He is struck by absolute paralyzing terror.
Right.
Now, I have to pause on Raskolnikov's logic here because it feels completely absurd to me. He is supposedly planning this brilliant, flawless mastermind business, which we soon learn is premeditated murder.
Yeah.
And he's walking around the scene of the future crime in a bizarre top hat that practically screams for people to look at him.
It's totally counterintuitive.
He literally mutters to himself on the street that trifles are what ruin everything, and that his hat is way too noticeable and will be remembered by witnesses, so why wear it? Isn't his subconscious deliberately sabotaging his grand, flawless plan from the very start?
Well, this raises an important question about the nature of his delusion. The hat perfectly highlights the massive oscillation in his mind between grand, megalomaniacal delusions of being a Superman who is above the law and his intense, paranoid, crippling self-loathing.
Wow, yeah. On one hand, he believes his intellect is so superior that he can commit the perfect crime.
But on the other, he is making amateurish mistakes that practically beg for him to be caught, because this walk he is taking isn't just a random stroll to clear his head.
It's what he specifically terms a rehearsal.
Exactly. He is testing the mechanics of his plan. He has meticulously counted exactly 730 steps from the gate of his building to a huge house divided into tiny tenements where his target lives.
It's so chilling how he reduces the distance to a number. 730 steps. He's trying to turn a human act into cold mathematics.
And he's walking those steps to visit the apartment of the pawnbroker, a woman named Alyona Ivanovna.
And Dostoevsky spares no detail in making her appear repulsive. She's described as a withered, diminutive 60-year-old woman with sharp, malignant eyes, hair thickly smeared with oil, and a thin neck that looks exactly like a hen's leg.
She wears a mangy fur cape draped over her shoulders, even in the stifling July heat, coughing and hacking.
Raskolnikov has come to pawn his father's old silver watch, which has a globe engraved on the back. It's a family heirloom, a symbol of his past, his father, his connection to a wider world.
And what does he get for it? A measly 1 ruble and 15 kopecks.
And that's only after she viciously, coldly deducts her exorbitant interest in advance.
Right. This rehearsal scene serves a dual, deeply psychological purpose. On the surface, yes, he is securing a few pathetic coins just to survive another day, but beneath that, he is mapping the territory of his future transgression.
He is obsessively noting the layout of her 2 tiny sun-baked rooms.
He focuses on the position of her keys jingling on a steel ring in her right pocket. He deduces from her movements that she must keep a strong box hidden under her bed.
He is actively testing his own nerve, seeing if his body will obey his intellect.
And the immediate result. When he leaves her apartment and steps back onto the street, he is overwhelmed with a profound physical loathing.
He cries out, "Oh, God, how loathsome it all is. What filthy things my heart is capable of."
His soul is screaming at him to stop. His physical isolation has primed him to entertain these extreme thoughts, but the true ideological fuel for his crime isn't born in a vacuum.
Right. It is supplied by the desperate, broken people he encounters when he finally desperately seeks out human contact.
And that brings us out of the stifling heat of the street and down into the dark, sticky subterranean tavern.
Raskolnikov stumbles down the steps into this basement pothouse because he is dizzy, his head is spinning, and he feels he needs a beer just to keep from fainting.
And sitting in the corner is a man who looks like a retired government clerk, but his clothes are practically falling off him, he's balding, and his face is horribly bloated and tinted yellow from chronic, relentless drinking.
This is the titular counselor, Marmeladov. And Marmeladov, seemingly unprompted, proceeds to tell Raskolnikov his entire life story.
It is an absolute masterclass in systemic tragedy and the economics of desperation. Marmeladov is a pivotal figure because he represents the complete, unavoidable collapse of human dignity under the crushing weight of poverty and addiction.
He doesn't make excuses for himself, though, does he?
No, in fact, he wallows in his own degradation. He openly admits to Raskolnikov that poverty is not a vice, but beggary is.
He explains the distinction, right? In poverty, you may still retain your innate nobility of soul, but in beggary, a man is swept out of human society with a broom.
Exactly. Marmeladov have a wife, Katerina Ivanovna. She is an educated woman, an officer's daughter, who was driven to marry him out of sheer destitution after her first husband died.
And now, she is suffering from severe consumption tuberculosis. They live in a freezing, damp room where they have 3 small children, quite literally starving to death.
And what does Marmeladov do? He steals their last pathetic possessions to buy vodka. He looks Raskolnikov in the eye and tells him, "I have sold her very stockings for drink. Her mohair shawl I sold for drink."
He even stole his own official civil service uniform, which Katerina had bought with their very last pennies to get him a respectable job, and traded it to a tavern keeper for alcohol.
Because he cannot face the guilt of his actions, he currently sleeps outside on a hay barge on the Neva River, completely abandoning his family.
It's a horrific portrait of addiction. But the part of Marmeladov's confession that genuinely makes your stomach drop is what happens to his daughter from his first marriage, Sonia.
Right, because Marmeladov drinks away every single cent they manage to scrape together, and because the young children are crying from the physical pain of hunger.
Katerina Ivanovna, who is being driven half mad by the tuberculosis eating her lungs and the sheer terror of starvation, turns to Sonia in a fit of bitter sarcasm.
She demands to know why Sonia doesn't go out and earn money with her body since she's just sitting there eating their bread.
It's said in anger and despair, but Sonia, this gentle, deeply religious, fair-haired girl whose formal education stopped at reading ancient history, takes it literally. She actually does it.
The scene Marmeladov paints of Sonia's return is one of the most agonizing in literature. He describes seeing Sonia come back into their miserable room at 9 o'clock at night. She doesn't speak.
She silently walks to the table and places 30 rubles down.
Then she takes a large green draped delaine shawl, completely covers her head and face in shame, and lies down on her bed, her thin shoulders shuddering as she cries.
And Katerina Ivanovna, instantly realizing the monstrous reality of what her sarcasm has driven this innocent girl to do, drops to her knees by the bed. She spends the entire evening kissing Sonia's feet in silent, weeping agony.
To continue this work and keep the family from starving, Sonia is forced to go to the police and take a yellow ticket, which was the legalized registration document for prostitutes in Tsarist Russia.
Because of this ticket, she is deemed a moral hazard and is forced by the landlady to move out of the family's apartment entirely.
So if you are listening to this, try to put yourself in Raskolnikov's shoes for a second.
You are sitting in a dingy basement, listening to a man explain how the world is structured so ruthlessly that a pure, innocent girl has to publicly destroy her own soul just so her siblings can have a piece of bread.
It is the ultimate economic sacrifice. She is selling her physical body, her future, and her standing in society.
And the horrific realization for Raskolnikov is that this isn't an isolated tragedy. The theme of systemic economic sacrifice is immediately, violently mirrored in his own life the very next morning.
He wakes up in his cupboard of a room, and the servant Nastasia hands him a thick, heavy letter from his mother, Pulcheria.
It's the first letter he's received in months. And through this letter, he learns the devastating truth about his sister, Dunya.
The letter operates as a psychological trigger. Pulcheria explains that Dunya had been working in the provinces as a governess for a wealthy family, the Svidrigailovs.
And the husband of the house, Svidrigaïlov, becomes dangerously obsessed with Dunya. He corners her, makes shameful, aggressive advances.
And when his wife, Marfa Petrovna, accidentally overhears him, she immediately and wrongly blames Dunya, assuming she was seducing her husband.
Dunya is thrown out of the house into the freezing rain, dumped in a peasant's cart, and driven back to her mother.
Marfa Petrovna then proceeds to drag Dunya's reputation through the mud across the entire town. They are essentially excommunicated, unable to even walk down the street without facing abuse.
Eventually, Svidrigaïlov is forced to confess the truth and clear Dunya's name. But the profound psychological damage and the sheer terror of total ruin have left their mark.
And now, supposedly to save herself and her mother from future poverty, Dunya is rushing headlong into a marriage with a 45-year-old wealthy government official named Porfiry Petrovitch Luzhin.
The way the mother describes Luzhin in the letter is meant to sound optimistic, but you read between the lines and it is absolutely terrifying.
Luzhin is a lawyer, and he specifically stated out loud that he had always wanted to marry a girl of good reputation who had experienced extreme, crushing poverty.
Why? Because he explicitly believes a man ought not to be indebted to his wife in any way. Instead, a wife should look upon her husband as her savior, her benefactor, and be entirely subserviently bound to his will.
It is a completely cold economic transaction dressed up in the language of a rescue. He wants total psychological dominance over this young woman.
And Dunya, who is fiercely intelligent and proud, is accepting this loveless marriage to an arrogant tyrant for one specific reason, so that she can secure her brother Raskolnikov's future.
She hopes Luzhin will eventually hire Raskolnikov in his legal office in St. Petersburg and pull him out of his poverty.
So we must ask, how does a mind already teetering on the edge of the abyss process this information?
Raskolnikov reads about his sister sacrificing herself to a wealthy tyrant just to fund his university studies, and he is engulfed in rage.
He leaves his room, wandering the streets, and vows he will never, ever accept Dunya's sacrifice. He draws a direct, unbroken line between Dunya's impending marriage to Luzhin and Sonia's yellow ticket.
To him, they are exactly the same thing, women destroying themselves to feed their families. He recognizes that society is fundamentally structured to force the weak and the desperate to consume themselves just to survive.
So we see Raskolnikov leaving his last few copper coins on the Marmeladov's windowsill after helping the drunken man home, genuinely horrified by their plight.
He receives his mother's letter, and he weeps over Dunya's sacrifice.
He clearly possesses a deep, almost painful well of empathy. If he has so much empathy, so much burning desire to protect these women from being exploited, how does his brain make the leap to committing murder to solve it?
It's a huge leap.
How does he simultaneously justify taking an axe and splitting a frail old woman's skull? Is his empathy actually the weapon his madness is using against him?
That is the precise, terrifying paradox of his character. His horror at their sacrifices completely twists his moral compass.
Because he adamantly refuses to let his sister sell her soul for him. He feels a frantic, immediate need to acquire money and power to save her.
He cannot wait for a slow, legitimate path to wealth. Dunya is going to marry Luzhin in a matter of weeks. Therefore, he begins to view his impending crime not as a greedy, self-serving murder, but as his own dark, necessary sacrifice.
If Sonia can destroy her purity and social standing to save children, why can't he destroy his own conscience, his own moral purity, and the life of a parasitic pawnbroker to save his mother and sister?
Exactly. He convinces himself that by taking on the sin of murder, he is stepping outside of traditional morality to become a savior. He's internalizing the sickness of his environment.
Yes, he's building an entire philosophical framework out of desperation. But theory is one thing. You can sit in your room and theorize about being a savior all day long. Action requires a spark.
It requires a trigger to push you over the edge.
And the universe, or perhaps just the selective perception of his own broken mind, gives him a series of violent, unavoidable pushes.
Right after reading the letter, he's wandering the boulevard, his mind reeling, and he sees a young girl, maybe 15 years old, completely drunk, staggering down the street in a torn silk dress.
She's clearly been taken advantage of, likely drugged or given too much alcohol, and simply dumped on the street.
And a few yards away, a fat, fashionably dressed dandy is stalking her, watching her stumble, just waiting for the right moment to pounce and take her away.
Raskolnikov's immediate, visceral reaction is to act as her protector. He rushes over, physically threatens the dandy, finds a policeman on patrol, and forcefully points out the predator.
He even reaches into his pocket and gives the policeman 20 kopecks out of his own incredibly meager funds to pay for a cab to take the girl safely home.
He is fiercely outraged by the exploitation unfolding in front of him. But then, in a terrifying psychological flip that happens in the blink of an eye, a dark revulsion comes over him.
He suddenly shouts at the policeman to let the dandy have her. He says, "Let them devour each other alive. What is it to me? A certain percentage, they tell us, must every year go to the devil, I suppose, so that the rest may remain chaste."
It's a chilling 180-degree turn. He goes from a fierce, empathetic protector to a cold, cynical statistician.
He's basically spouting the talking points of the utilitarian sociologist of his day treating human suffering, the destruction of a 15-year-old girl. Like, it's just a tax bracket or a math equation required for society to function.
Exhausted by this massive emotional whiplash, he wanders off the road, collapses into the bushes on Petrovsky Ostrov, and falls into a deep, exhausted sleep. And this is where his subconscious takes over.
This is where he has the dream.
Yes, the dream.
The dream of the beaten horse is arguably one of the most famous, harrowing, and psychologically dense sequences in all of world literature.
Raskolnikov dreams he is a 7-year-old boy holding his father's hand, walking past a tavern in his rural hometown.
Outside this tavern, a massive, heavy peasant's cart is hitched to a thin, wretched, exhausted little sorrel nag.
A drunken peasant named Mikolka comes stumbling out of the tavern, furiously angry, and invites the whole crowd of revelers to pile into the cart. He swears to them that he will make this dying skeletal horse pull them all at a gallop.
The sheer physical cruelty detailed in this scene is so visceral it makes you want to look away.
The horse obviously can't even move the cart, let alone gallop with a half-dozen heavy men inside it, and the crowd just laughs. They think it's hilarious.
Mikolka flies into a demonic, uncontrollable rage. He starts whipping the horse relentlessly, specifically aiming the lash across her eyes.
The crowd gets whipped up into a frenzy and joins in, beating the animal with heavy wooden sticks.
Little Raskolnikov is screaming, tears streaming down his face, pulling at his father's hand, begging him to intervene.
But his father just pulls him away, saying, "It's not our business. They are drunk. They are foolish. Let them be."
Finally, Mikolka, furious that the horse won't die, grabs a massive iron crowbar from the cart and literally beats the horse's spine until she collapses and dies in the dirt.
And the little boy breaks free, rushes through the laughing crowd, puts his little arms around the dead, bleeding horse's head, and kisses its eyes and lips.
If we unpack the symbolism here, the dream masterfully synthesizes the agonizing dual nature of Raskolnikov.
The child weeping for the horse represents his innate, boundless compassion and his deep subconscious horror of violence.
The horse itself represents all the suffering, burdened innocence of the world. Senya, Dunya, the girl on the boulevard.
He wakes up gasping for air, covered in cold sweat, his whole body shaking. He cries out to God, "Can it be that I shall really take an axe, that I shall strike her on the head, split her skull open, that I shall tread in the sticky warm blood?"
His physical body and his deep subconscious soul are violently, physically rejecting the impending crime. He feels an immense wave of relief, believing he has finally shaken off the nightmare of his own murderous plan.
But the tragedy is that his intellect, his cold, rationalizing brain, is still completely trapped in the arithmetic of a conversation he heard a month prior.
Let's trace that back, because it's the anchor of his entire philosophy. 6 weeks ago, right after pawning a ring to the old woman for the very first time, he went to a tavern to get a drink.
And while sitting there in the dark, he overheard a student and a young officer playing billiards and having a debate.
And by sheer terrifying coincidence, the student was talking about that exact same pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna.
The student lays out a mathematical moral philosophy that plants the seed in Raskolnikov's brain.
He argues that on one side of the scale, you have a stupid, spiteful, ailing old woman who does actual, measurable harm to the world.
She beats her gentle, subservient half-sister Lizaveta. She hoards wealth she doesn't use. She preys on the desperate, ruining lives with her predatory loans. She is a parasite.
On the other side of the scale, you have thousands of fresh young lives being thrown away for want of basic financial help.
The student poses a hypothetical question. Wouldn't it be just to kill the old woman, take her hoarded wealth, and use it to save dozens of families from destitution?
One death and 100 lives in exchange. It's simple arithmetic. He explicitly calls her life worth less than a louse or a black beetle.
I mean, this student's logic is the ultimate chilling manifestation of the classic trolley problem. Pull the lever, kill the terrible old woman, save 100 starving families.
It sounds almost rational if you strip away all human emotion.
But it's one thing to debate the trolley problem over a beer in a philosophy class. It's an entirely different thing to actually pick up an axe and physically pull the lever yourself.
The officer in the tavern even challenges the student on this. He asks him point blank, "Would you kill the old woman yourself?"
And the student instantly recoils and says, "Of course not. I was only arguing the justice of it."
And that right there is the critical distinction. The student is merely theorizing. He is playing intellectual games.
Raskolnikov, however, internalizes it. He absorbs this utilitarian math as a cosmic justification for his own personal crisis.
And then the final fatal push comes through what he perceives as the blind hand of destiny. He wakes up from the dream of the beaten horse, Feeling free and cleansed from the spell of the murder, he decides to walk home.
But for some inexplicable reason, instead of taking his normal route, he takes a detour through the Haymarket.
And there, standing among the stalls, by sheer horrific coincidence, he overhears a conversation between a huckster and Lizaveta, the pawnbroker's abused half-sister.
He stops dead in his tracks and hears that the very next day at exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, Lizaveta has agreed to come look at some goods. She will be away from home.
The old woman will be entirely alone.
The universe has provided the exact time and the exact place. Hearing that, all of his relief from the dream evaporates. He feels a sudden, terrifying chill, like a man condemned to death.
He feels entirely stripped of his free will. His intellect tells him the math is sound. The universe has provided the opportunity.
And so we hurtle toward the execution of the plan, where the pristine, abstract theory violently collides with the messy, unpredictable, terrifying reality of taking a human life.
Raskolnikov's preparation for the crime is meticulous on the surface, yet deeply flawed because he is battling his own crumbling nervous system.
He literally sews a strip of heavy shirt material inside his bulky summer overcoat, right under the left armhole, to create a hidden noose. This is so he can carry the axe without it being seen on the street.
He fashions a fake pledge to distract the old woman. A piece of wood and an iron strip, wrapped tightly in clean paper and tied with an incredibly complex knot.
The psychological design of this fake pledge is brilliant in its cruelty. It is designed to keep her eyes focused downward and both of her hands fully occupied, trying to untie the knot.
His plan is to sneak into his landlady's kitchen, steal the axe, walk the 730 steps, and execute the math.
But the chaos, the disease of mistakes he feared, begins immediately. He creaks down to the kitchen, peeks through the door, and Nastasia, the cook, is sitting right there, calmly hanging up laundry.
His entire plan is instantly ruined. He's humiliated, panicked, and feels like a fool.
He wanders back out, pacing the courtyard, thinking it's all over. But then, as he's passing the porter's lodge, he notices the door is slightly ajar.
He looks inside, and there, gleaming under a wooden bench, is an axe. The porter is nowhere to be seen.
He grabs it, slips it into the hidden noose under his coat, and his mind latches onto this as a sign of dark providence. He thinks, when reason fails, the devil helps.
He walks out onto the street, heading toward the pawn shop, constantly fighting the violent, sickening thumping of his own heart.
The walk to the apartment is an agony of hyper-awareness. He finally arrives, slips past a cart delivering hay, makes it up the dark stairs to the 4th floor, and rings the bell.
He rings it once, twice, 3 times. Finally, Alyona Ivanovna opens the door, but just a tiny crack. She is highly suspicious.
He forces his way in, stammering, claiming he brought the silver cigarette case he promised her last time. He hands her the tightly bound fake pledge.
As she turns away from him toward the light of the window to examine it and begins picking at the tight string, the moment arrives. But his hands are incredibly weak.
He feels a sudden, overwhelming giddiness hit him. He reaches into the coat, pulls the axe out of the noose, swings it up with both arms, and brings the blunt side down squarely on the top of her head.
He strikes her again and she falls to the floor. The physical reality of the act is immediate and horrific. The blood gushes out.
He drops the axe, snatches the keys from her pocket, and runs into the bedroom to find the strong box he knows is under the bed.
But all of his cold, calculating intellect completely evaporates. He's fumbling with the keys, his hands are shaking violently, he's wiping blood on the red brocade clothes stored in the box.
He's stuffing gold watches, bracelets, and jewelry into his pockets, without even looking at them, just grabbing blindly.
And then, well, the absolute unthinkable happens.
He hears a faint cry from the other room.
He freezes. He runs out of the bedroom, axe in hand, and there, standing right in the middle of the room with a bundle of clothes in her arms, is Lizaveta.
This is the moment the entire philosophical foundation of his crime shatters into dust. Lizaveta, the gentle, abused 35-year-old half-sister who was supposed to be at the Haymarket.
She is staring at the murdered body of her sister on the floor, white as a sheet, trembling so violently she is unable to even scream. She backs away slowly into a corner.
When Raskolnikov rushes at her, raising the blood-stained axe, her reaction is heartbreaking. She doesn't fight back. She doesn't even raise her hands to protect her face.
She just raises her left hand slightly, as though weakly motioning him away, her mouth twitching in silent terror like a frightened small child. And Raskolnikov brings the axe down.
But notice the specific, terrifying irony in the mechanics of this second murder. When he killed the miserable, cruel pawnbroker, the louse he deemed unworthy of life, he used the blunt side of the axe.
But when he faces the innocent, gentle Lizaveta, he swings in sheer panic and he uses a sharp blade. It literally splits the top of her head open.
How do we interpret that? To me, it completely destroys his grand theory. The math of killing one bad person to save 100 good ones is ruined the exact second human unpredictability enters the room.
In his attempt to become a Superman who cures society's ills, he physically butchers the exact type of suffering, innocent person his theory was supposedly designed to protect.
You have hit on the exact core of the novel's tragedy. It is the complete, instantaneous, and total collapse of his Superman ideology.
He truly believed his superior intellect would immunize him from the panic, the sloppiness, and the moral gravity that plague ordinary criminals.
But when faced with the chaotic reality of a living, breathing world, his grand theory cannot protect him. He's reduced to a frightened, bumbling, cornered animal reacting on pure instinct.
The reality of murder is not a clean, balanced philosophical equation drawn on a chalkboard. It is sticky blood on your hands, it is the piteous, uncomprehending face of an innocent woman, and it is blind, suffocating panic.
And the panic only intensifies from there. The execution of the crime turns into a desperate fight for survival. He tries to wash the axe and his bloody hands in a bucket of water in the kitchen.
He goes to leave the apartment feeling he has somehow survived the ordeal, and he realizes in absolute cold sweat horror that the front door to the apartment, the door leading out to the public staircase, has been wide open the entire time.
He never locked it behind him. Lizaveta had just walked right in because the door was unlatched.
He rushes to the door and locks it with the heavy iron hook just as he hears heavy footsteps coming up the stairs.
It's Kof, a large, impatient man who had a scheduled appointment with the old woman. Koch rings the bell. He waits.
He shakes the door handle and realizes the hook is fastened from the inside. He realizes somebody is in there.
The suspense in this scene is almost unbearable. Raskolnikov is standing on one side of the thin door, holding his breath, clutching the axe, while Koch is on the other side.
Soon, Kof is joined by a young student who also had an appointment. The student realizes something is deeply wrong and runs downstairs to fetch the porter.
Koch waits for a minute, gets impatient and frustrated, and crucially, abandons his post at the door to run down the stairs after the student.
In that tiny, miraculous window of time, Raskolnikov unhooks the door, slips out onto the landing, and begins creeping down the stairs.
But he hears a whole crowd of people coming up. He is trapped between floors.
Just when all seems lost, he notices that an apartment on the second floor, where painters had been working earlier that day, has its door open.
He ducks inside, hiding behind the wall just as Koch, the student, and the porter rush past him up to the fourth floor.
He slips back out, makes it to the street unnoticed, returns the axe to its exact spot in the porter's lodge, and manages to stumble back to his own room, where he collapses fully clothed on his sofa.
That desperate escape hurls us directly into the aftermath.
Yeah.
The crime of the physical body is over, but the punishment of the mind has just begun. This covers the beginning of part 2 of the novel.
Raskolnikov wakes up the next day, and the immediate physical and mental toll is absolutely staggering. He wakes up confused, thinking it's still night.
He hears drunken shouts from the street, realizes it's actually late afternoon of the next day, and jumps up in sheer terror. He thinks he's losing his mind.
He remembers the crime and starts frantically searching his clothes for blood. He finds frayed, bloody edges on his trousers and literally cuts them off with a penknife.
He suddenly remembers the stolen goods are still stuffed in his pockets. He frantically pulls them out and stuffs them into a dark hole in the wall where the yellow wallpaper is peeling away.
The psychological fracturing we witness here is profound. He is shivering with violent fever, drifting in and out of consciousness.
The mechanism of his own mind, which he once prided himself on, has become his primary, inescapable enemy.
He realizes with a jolt of horror that he forgot to remove the bloody cloth noose from his overcoat. He finds spots of blood on his sock.
He has no fire, no way to burn the evidence, no way to clean himself. And then at the height of this paranoid frenzy, there is a violent knocking at the door.
The porter hands him a gray, wax-sealed official summons ordering him to appear at the district police station.
Imagine the feeling in his stomach. He just committed a double-axe murder. He's sitting in a room with blood on his clothes, and the police hand him a summons.
His reaction is sheer, cynical despair. He assumes it's all over, that they've found him out.
In a moment of absolute dark comedy and madness, he actually puts the bloody sock back on his foot because he literally has no other clean socks to wear, laughing out loud at the absurdity of his own pathetic situation.
He walks to the police station, fully ready to fall on his knees and confess everything just to end the psychological torture.
He waits in the stifling, paint-smelling office, watching the head clerk and the assistant superintendent, Ilya Petrovitch. And then the clerk hands him a document.
It has absolutely nothing to do with the murder. It's an IOU. His landlady is simply suing him for an unpaid debt of 115 rubles.
The emotional whiplash he experiences is intense. The relief he feels is instantaneous, but it manifests in a deeply perverse way.
Because he feels he has outsmarted the hangman, he suddenly becomes arrogant. He starts arguing with the police officers loudly and proudly, declaring his rights as a former university student, picking fights over nothing.
But this sudden burst of manic ego is incredibly short-lived. As he's standing there, dictating his official written statement acknowledging the debt, he overhears Ilya Petrovitch and another officer, Nikodem Fomitch, casually discussing the gruesome murders of Alyona and Lizaveta.
They are discussing the painters, the open door, the exact timeline of when the killer must have slipped out.
Raskolnikov stands up, tries to walk toward the door, and faints dead away, crashing onto the floor.
When he comes to, they sit him in a chair, offer him some yellow water in a glass, and start asking him questions.
They ask him where he was yesterday at 7 o'clock, the exact time of the murder. He manages to stammer out that he was walking on the street, but the suspicion in the room instantly becomes palpable.
The officers exchange looks. He leaves the station in a blind panic, knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that they will soon come to search his room.
He rushes home, grabs all the stolen goods from the hole in the wall, and walks for miles through the city, trying to find a safe place to dump them.
He wants to throw them in the canal, but there are too many people. Finally, he wanders into a deserted courtyard and sees a massive, unhewn stone sitting in the dirt.
He rolls the stone back, buries the jewelry in the stolen purse in the depression underneath, presses the stone back down, and walks away laughing, a thin, nervous, terrifying little laugh.
But notice what he realizes about himself immediately after burying the loot. He just hid the treasure he committed murder for, but he never even opened the purse.
He never untied the string. He doesn't actually know how much money he killed for.
He stops in the street and thinks to himself, if I really had a certain and definite object, if I really did this to save my family, how is it I did not even glance into the purse for which I have undergone these agonies and have deliberately undertaken this base, filthy, degrading business?
The realization crashes down on him. The crime was never actually about the cash. The money was merely an excuse.
The murder was an arrogant test of his own philosophical theory, a test to see if he was a great man capable of stepping over moral boundaries.
And by panicking, fainting, and burying the uncounted reward in the dirt, he realizes he has failed his own test catastrophically. He is not a Superman. He is just a murderer.
It's like a psychological burglar alarm has gone off inside his own head, and he has absolutely no way to unplug it. The noise is deafening.
Seeking some kind of anchor, he goes to see his old university friend, Razumihin.
Razumihin is everything Raskolnikov is not. He's this boisterous, good-natured, incredibly resilient guy who survives extreme poverty by doing odd translation work and never losing his optimism.
Razumihin takes one look at Raskolnikov standing in his doorway and sees a man who is seriously, deeply ill.
He immediately offers him translation work, specifically a German text asking the philosophical question, is woman a human being? And even gives him 3 rubles out of his own pocket in advance so he can buy food.
Raskolnikov takes the money and the papers, walks down the stairs in silence, but then stops. He turns around, walks back up, puts the money and the papers back on Razumihin's table, and leaves without saying a single word.
This bizarre action perfectly encapsulates the overriding theme of his psychological punishment: profound alienation.
Raskolnikov realizes he cannot accept innocent help, and he can no longer participate in normal human commerce, friendship, or society.
By shedding blood, he hasn't elevated himself above humanity. He has violently excised himself from the human race. He can't even speak to his only friend.
This devastating isolation is further symbolized in the famous incident on the Nikolaevsky Bridge. As he's walking home in a daze, he's nearly run over by a wealthy carriage.
The driver whips him violently across the back. An elderly merchant woman and her daughter, seeing this ragged, beaten man, take pity on him.
The woman hands him a 20-kopeck coin, saying, "Take it, my good man, in Christ's name."
Raskolnikov stands alone on the bridge, clutching the coin. He looks out at the beautiful deep blue water of the Neva River and the glittering golden cupola of the cathedral, a view he used to love and admire when he was an innocent student.
Now looking at it, he feels utterly cold, dead, and entirely disconnected from the beauty of the world. He opens his hand and deliberately flings the 20-kopeck charity coin into the dark water below.
By tossing that coin, he severs his very last tie to humanity. He rejects grace, he rejects charity, and he embraces the abyss.
He walks home, collapses onto his sofa, and falls into a terrifying, feverish delirium. And the way his guilt manifests is horrifying.
He is awakened by the sound of horrific blood-curdling screaming out on the staircase. He hears his landlady howling in pain, sounding as though she's being mercilessly beaten, her head smashed against the stairs.
And he distinctly hears the voice of the police officer from the station, Alyona Petrovitch, cursing, yelling, and kicking her.
Raskolnikov is frozen in infinite terror on his bed. He thinks the police have finally come, that they are tearing the building apart in a rage to get to him.
But when the servant Nastasia finally comes into his room to bring him some soup, he asks her why the police are beating the landlady.
Nastasia looks at him like he's crazy. She tells him no one was there. No one was beating the landlady.
She says, "That's the blood crying in your ears. When there's no outlet for it and it gets clotted, you begin fancying things."
The profound implication of the text here proves that the central punishment in Crime and Punishment isn't a legal sentence.
It isn't going to be delivered by a judge in a courtroom or by a firing squad in a public square.
The true punishment is the immediate, crushing, inescapable weight of a fractured human soul. His conscience, the very thing he thought his superior utilitarian intellect could easily rationalize away, is violently, physically rejecting his actions.
It manifests as a high fever, sudden fainting spells, and terrifying, vivid auditory hallucinations. He is trapped in a prison of his own making, and he's both the warden and the tortured inmate.
We've covered incredible ground today.
We really have. We've traced Raskolnikov's harrowing journey from the physical and historical pressure cooker of Dostoevsky's own lived trauma, translating directly into the stifling, impoverished garret in July St. Petersburg.
We saw how the systemic economic sacrifice of women like Sonia and Dunya warped his empathy into a twisted, arrogant justification for murder.
We examine the lethal collision of his childish compassion seen so vividly in the heartbreaking dream of the beaten horse, with the cold, utilitarian arithmetic he overheard from the student in the tavern.
We walked step by step through the botched mechanics of the double murder, where the sharp edge of the axe physically destroyed his theory of being a superman above the law.
And finally, we witnessed his total psychological collapse, the paranoia, the fainting, the realization that he didn't even care about the money, and the ultimate alienation of throwing a charity coin into the river.
It is a masterful, terrifying exploration of the limits of human reason. Dostoevsky demonstrates that when you try to sever the intellect from the moral conscience, the mind will tear itself apart, trying to reconcile the impossible.
Thank you so much for joining us on this intensely psychological deep dive into Dostoevsky's masterpiece. The sheer density of the human experience packed into these chapters is just staggering.
It really is.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final idea to ponder on your own. Consider this. What if the true tragedy of Raskolnikov isn't just that he committed a horrific, bloody murder, but that his crime exposes a dangerous, lingering flaw in all of us?
That's a powerful thought.
Whenever we try to reduce human lives to a simple math equation, weighing the value of one person against the abstract greater good, we don't elevate ourselves to supermen. We just lose our humanity. So ask yourself, as you look around today, where in our modern world are we still secretly trying to apply Raskolnikov's arithmetic?
And when you inevitably find those instances, remember that the psychological muddy waters of the human mind cannot be cured with a sharp edge or a simple equation.
The X-ray machine is fundamentally broken.
Exactly. We must deal with the human soul in all its messy, unpredictable reality, not as a mathematical variable to be balanced on a spreadsheet.